how do you trust other people with the vision? So today I want to jump into episode 19, trusting others to run with the vision. I'm going to read a verse to you, Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2 and 3. It says, "Then the Lord answered and said to me, write the vision, not your vision, the vision, and make it plain on a tablet, that he may run who reads it." The person that's reading the vision is running with it. It's the key component to having a successful vision is understanding my role and their role, is let them that read it run with it, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it will speak and it will not lie. Though it tarries, wait for it, because it will surely come. It will not tarry. I believe this is the key component, is when you trust people to run with the vision. You give them freedom to interpret. You give them freedom to digest it and catch it and run with it. That's when they flourish, but it also is when your church will flourish or your business will flourish. You know, I've said this recently, that people will work for a paycheck, but they'll give their life for something they believe in and a person that believes in them. So when you as the leader, when you as the visionary, when you as the pastor, when you as the owner of the company truly believe in your employees, who are really your greatest assets, when you believe in them and they feel that you believe in them and that you can cast a vision that they believe in, they'll give their whole life for it. My life as a leader isn't to manage the day-to-day in people's lives. It's to empower them to be better than they were yesterday. It's to infuse the anointing of God on the inside of them and help them discover their talents and their gifts and their skills on the inside of them, sharpen those things to equip them for the work of the ministry, to go do it. Jesus did this. When he sent out the 70, he sent out the 72, he said, go, here's a couple instructions, go. He didn't follow them. He didn't chase them down. They came back and they reported with great zeal and excitement. And Jesus was like, amen. At least your name is written down in the Lamb's Book of Life. We don't have one verse that Jesus interviewed, had an after-action review and everything else, and he nitpicked at everything they didn't do right. He just came back and said, hey, they had victory. Come on, we're going to celebrate it. May not have done it all right, but he didn't get hung up on all that. He empowered them to go do what God's called them to do. That's what we do as leaders, is we've got to empower, and we've got it. That part of that's trust. So let's talk about it. How do I trust them? Number one, you got to accept your role. If you are the leader, if you are the pastor, you got to accept your role, your position within the church or the organization. You got to accept it. What are you? The visionary. You're the leader. People are following you. Have a character that they want to follow. Have a reputation they want to follow. Have a zeal about you that they want to follow. Nobody can wear your shoes. My father-in-law used to say it all the time. He used to say, Terry can preach better than me. Terry is smarter than I am. He can speak better than I can. He can write better than I am. But he always would point out his toe and he'd say, but he can't wear my shoes. And I understand that so much more. Is I didn't want to wear his shoes. But the reality was he understood his role. You're going to have people around you that are better. That there's going to be intimidation around you. There's going to be fear. There's going to be jealousy. There's going to be envy around you as a leader. But you got to realize nobody can wear your shoes. God anointed you to do this. God put the vision on the inside of you. He put the business on the inside of you. He put the pastoral on inside of you. He set you in. Nobody can wear your shoes. What is your shoes? Your job is to set the course, the direction, the vision of the future for the job, for the business, for the church that you're in. That's your job. You're the visionary. You don't have to run the vision by yourself. You got to set the course. You got to empower people. You got to make it plain, which is making it in such a way that they can catch it. Why? Because he that reads it, let him run with it. Number one, how do you trust people? You got to accept your role. You got to know who you are. There are people that are better than I am. There's better speakers than I am. There's more eloquent speakers than I am. There's probably better counselors than I am. There's better pastors in our church than I am probably. But I know my role. I know I'm the pastor of Abundant Life Church. I don't need a title. I don't need it on a business card. I don't need people to remind me. Why? Because I've accepted my role. I'm now the visionary. I've caught it. It's been deposited in my heart. I get it. I see it plainly. My job is to make it plain so that they can read it. My job is to equip them to do the work. That's my job. I'm not interested in anything else. Accept your role. That's the first part of trusting. When you don't accept your role, you will have a hard time trusting everybody else because you feel like everybody's taking your job. They're getting more of the limelight. They're getting more credit. I don't care who gets the credit. As long as Jesus Christ is glorified and the vision's coming to pass, what do I care if they're tooting, Stacy's horn or Felix's horn or anybody else's horn in our church? What do I care? I'm doing my job. I have accepted my role. I know my position. Nobody can wear my shoes in this place. I'm good. Let's move on. I'm telling you, you got to stop wondering and worrying and what's happening with everybody else and trust people by you got to know who you are first. Second thing is you got to be relational. Leaders that are on pedestals have very few followers. The leader that's on a pedestal looks more like an idol than a leader. People look up to you, but they don't know you. Jesus knew his disciples and his disciples knew him. You'll know their voice and they'll know your name. And that's the difference in managers and just people that want the limelight and true leaders. Jesus taught us many of this thing. You got to know your team, not just the work they do. Jesus knew Judas was in his midst and he never called him out. Think about it. He was so relational. He knew Judas was there. He knew Peter would betray him. He knew what was all going on in amongst the disciples, but he never casted them away. He knew them, not just their work. You've got to be relational. If you're going to trust people to run, be relational. Get to know them, what makes them hurt, what makes them celebrate, what makes them laugh, what makes them mad, and don't push their buttons. Get to know them and be relational. Be approachable. Watch this from them. You can't have you can't touch this attitude. You gotta have a mentality that is approachable. You gotta have an open door policy for your team and the people around you. If you're going to be relational, they gotta feel like they can talk to you. They gotta feel like that when they're struggling, they can come share it with you. They gotta feel like that they can trust that the advice you give them is biblical and that they can run with it. You gotta be relational. If I don't know you, then I look at you as if you're way off on the end and I'll never compare. No, follow me as I follow Christ, Paul said. That means you got to know me and I got to get to know you. You got to know each other. You got to be relational. The relationships generates a great level of trust and a true follower mentality. If I can relate to you, I can trust you. And if I can trust you, I'm going to follow you. This is what relationships do. If you're going to trust people to run with the vision, you gotta number one, know your role, but you gotta be relational. People gotta know that they can relate and they can talk to you and that they can trust you to follow what's on the inside. If you want them to catch it, first they gotta follow you. The third one, watch this. Here it is. Empower others to take risks. I was in business with a couple guys and we had a real estate business. And I remember these statements like this: little risk, little reward. Big risk, big reward. And I'm all about big rewards. Why? You got to take big risks and you got to empower people to start small, little risk, little reward. And the more they do it, the more confidence they get in themselves, the more confidence you have in them, the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. Also, the little the risk, the little reward, or the little the fall. The bigger the risk, the bigger the reward, or the bigger the fall. So you got to help empower people to take risks, starting small, moving on up. You got to enable them. This is how you empower them to make risks. Enable them to make decisions, not just carry out orders. Give them the opportunity. Go tell me what we're going to do. Tell me how we're going to do it. Tell me what's the best way of doing it. Don't come to me with all your problems. Come to me with your resolves. That's empowering people. Don't just tell me what your problem is, but give me a couple of things that you've thought of, you've sought out, and this is part of enabling them to make decisions, not just carrying out orders. When there's a problem, empower them to make the decision. Give you the suggestion of what they would do best, and then vote for it. Why? You're empowering them to go take a risk. They're going to find it. The challenge them. Make a big risk at times. Don't sink the ship, right? But stand behind their decision, their risk. You stand behind it, whether it's right or wrong. If it's right, stand behind them and celebrate it. If it's wrong, accept the wrong, stand behind them and deal with it. But we don't correct in public. Jesus never corrected his disciples in public. He corrected the religious, the people against him. Leaders, we don't correct the people that are on our side in public. We do it in private. It's part of what Jesus taught us. We don't just blast people from a pulpit. We don't blast people in the midst of an event and it's wrong. We don't blast them. Jesus never did those things. And we learned so much from him in his leadership. I'm challenging you. This is how you empower people. They trust that when they fail, you're going to accept the failure with them, but you're going to bring the correction in private. You're not going to beat them up in public and embarrass them. They're already embarrassed because it has fallen, right? So we got to realize that part of taking a risk, there's a failure involved. In episode 15, I talked about failing forward, and I would challenge you to go back and look at that because we're all going to fail. We must normalize failure to some degree, just to some degree. We're not just saying, oh, it's great to fail. It's not, but we normalize it. We all fail, and in the failure, we learn the lesson. So we've got to help them understand and let them see by transparency our failures and how we've learned from them, and we can move on from it, right? The last thing about taking the risk is you got to generate a culture that embraces a dynamic laboratory mentality, one that is willing to go try new things, not just go repeat what we've always done, but that we got that dynamic mentality, that laboratory style, and we got to move away from what I call the static mentality or the safe and best practices mentality, the one that is, it always works, we've always done it, we should always do it this way. You know, those people that don't like new things or like to try new things, they always order the same thing. My wife does it at a steak, always the same thing. That's static. Why? It's safe and it's the best practice. I'm the dynamic guy. I'm going to order the things that I can't get anywhere else. Why? Because I want to try something new. And in your leadership, you got to empower them to go to the laboratory and try. And when it fails, try again and be okay with it. Celebrate it. Thomas Edison and the light bulb 1,000 times figured out how not to do it. And you got to give them that ability and empower them to do so. And the fourth thing is you got to eliminate anxiety. This is trusting people to run with the vision. I honestly think for me, this was the hardest part because I understand failure. I understand, every one of us are going to fail. But the anxiety part of, and I'm not an anxious person, but listen to what I'm going to say, is when you delegate authority to somebody to do a task and you're wondering, you haven't heard in a week, you haven't heard in 2 weeks, what's going on? Are we doing anything? It doesn't feel like anything's happening. It doesn't feel like anything's moving. And you're just sitting there and you haven't heard of a report of what's going on. And you're sitting there thinking, itching, scratching like, oh my gosh, I'm fiending for information. Tell me, because it doesn't seem like. And the trusting that things are happening even if you don't know. It's anxiety in the leadership. You got to eliminate this thing. Watch. The urge, this is what anxiety looks like. The urge to constantly check up on them, to constantly ask every day, what's going on, what's new, what's different. Even though you should know and want to know, you got to eliminate it. Why? Because you're empowering people to run with the vision. You're trusting them. You're trusting them. You're empowering them to sharpen their skills. You're empowering them to develop their leadership. And you got to resist that urge to constantly check up on them. How do you do that? You set report dates and you stick to them. So if you need a report every 2 weeks or every 10 days, set the date, and in between, shut up. Leave it alone. Don't send the email. Don't send the text. Don't unless it gets to the place where you haven't heard from them at all and the report date is passed. Now you have to deal with that. But if you can't deal with the urges so quickly, like it's coming, do this. If it's in between your set report dates, just ask them. Say, hey, not in a hurry. I'm just touching base. I'm in prayer. Talk to me a little bit about what we're dealing with. Where are you at right now? How can I pray with you? How can I help you? Do you need any help? And let them report to you. Let them tell you where they're at. Nod. Okay, thank you. Okay, what they're going to do is think, because you're asking the question, that you don't trust them. They're going to think that their decision might be wrong. So they're going to answer this way. So how do you think? Do you think that's okay? Do you think that decision was right? Is there something different you would like for me to do? Those questions come when there still isn't the trust factor. And in that moment, let me help you with this, eliminating the anxiety that you can trust people, is nod, agree with them, support their decisions, tell them things like this. I wouldn't do it any other way. I think that's a great idea. If you're not sure about it, let's just see where it goes. You made the decision. And support it. Don't change it. Don't change it midstream. Give the process the time to find out what it looks like at the end of the goal, right? That's what our goal is. You got to eliminate the anxiety, the itch, the fiend to know everything. And most of you say, well, I should know. Sure, you should know. That's why you generate report dates. You generate those things. My challenge is don't do it every day. Maybe once a week as a simple checkup by email or a text, or if you have to have a meeting. But the reality is, listen, you got to give them room to grow. That generates trust. And if you're badgering it, you're begging for information every day, you're missing the opportunity to empower and trust people. You've got to give them some ability to grow and develop and design and implement things. And you don't have to fix everything. My opinion is, I've learned it in almost 2 years. You don't have to fix it. Let them do it. And it probably is not the way I would do it. It's okay. They got to learn. People have to learn, and they want to. Here's the thing. People will give their life for somebody that values them. And that's what I'm challenging. You want growth in your ministry, you want growth in your church, start valuing people, their gifts, and empowering them to develop those. When you do, you'll see a different level of ownership, and they'll run with the vision God gave you for your ministry. The last one, number 5, stand with them when they fail. This is how you trust people. You build trust. It's not just you trusting them. They have to trust you. They have to trust that you support them. They have to trust that you're with them. They have to trust that you're gonna agree with their successes, and you're gonna stand in their failures. You're not throwing them under the bus, if you will. You're not putting them on blast in front of everybody. You're not belittling them and degrading them because they made mistakes. They need to know that you stand with them even in the failures. You can say it, but they got to know. You got to stand with them. You got to make that failure yours. You got to own it as the leader. Why? Because that's what delegation is. That's what empowerment is. Successes and failures. We're doing this together. We're in this thing together. I'm reminded of this one story, Jesus with Peter, James, and John. This is one of the greatest leadership principles in all of the Bible that I found personally for Terry Linscott. They come off of the mountain and they come down, and the disciples are casting out a devil. Well, the devil doesn't come out of the boy, and so the dad gets mad at the disciples, and he looks at the leader, Jesus, says, "What's wrong with your disciples? They can't do what you do." Notice this, the disciples following Jesus' lead, he's trusting them to cast out a devil. They can't do it. They failed. Jesus looks at the dad and says, "It's okay, give me the boy," casts out the devil, walks away, and never approaches the disciples until later when they're in private. Now, if this was religious folks that were trying to do it, he would have rebuked the religious folks. But because it was his disciples that were following him and were with him, he didn't openly rebuke them. He just stood with the failure. He accepted it. He fixed the problem and moved on. Never gave any reference to the disciples until they were in private, and then they asked him a question: where did we go wrong? And the level of relationship for the disciples to ask the question and trust that Jesus would answer it. All of this is trusting others to run with the vision. He did. And he didn't openly blast them in their failure. He did it in private. And he did it in a teaching, coaching moment, not in I can't believe you couldn't do this. He basically said, boys, this kind of only comes out by prayer and fasting. See the difference? It's that leadership level, and this is standing them with their failure. He never pointed out their failure to anybody. He just fixed it, and he moved on. This is what it looks like. This is empowering. This is moments of building trust. This is where people trust you, and you can trust them. They see your failure. You see their failure. It's transparency. It's vulnerability. When you accept the failure as your own and you don't cast the blame, listen, that's when people will start trusting you. My challenge, listen, today is you got to start trusting other people to run with the vision, God's vision, the heavenly vision. And how do you do it? I'm going to repeat them. Accept your role, know who you are, be relational, empower them to take risks, eliminate the anxiety, and stand with them when they fail.